In the heart of the 4th century, at a time when the Roman Empire was still trying to maintain its dominance over vast territories, Martinho was born, a figure whose life would transcend the barriers of time and become an example of compassion and unshakable faith. Born in Sabaria, a province that today corresponds to Hungary, Martinho was educated in a pagan environment, but from a young age he showed a different spirit, a curiosity that transcended the limits imposed by the society of his time. His father, an officer in the Roman army, wanted Martin to pursue a military career, as was the custom of soldiers' sons. Thus, while still a teenager, Martinho was forcibly enlisted and sent to serve in the army. However, even in the midst of military life, the flame of faith began to grow within him. His soul sought something that the stone idols and gods of Rome could not offer: eternal truth and spiritual peace. One of the most emblematic stories of his life occurred in Amiens, in present-day France, during a harsh winter. Martinho, then a young soldier, was riding through the city gates when he encountered an almost naked beggar, shivering from the cold. Without hesitation, the soldier drew his sword and cut his own cloak in half, offering half to the man in need. This scene, witnessed by some and told by many, would be the milestone of his complete conversion. That night, after the generous gesture, Martin had an extraordinary dream. He saw Christ dressed in half the cloak he had given to the beggar, saying to the angels who accompanied him, "Here is Martin, still a catechumen, who has clothed me." Upon awakening, Martinho understood that he could no longer postpone his baptism, so he looked for a priest, and with a heart full of joy, he became a Christian. His conversion was not an easy path. Military discipline and his family's expectations conflicted with his heart's calling. Even so, Martin decided that his loyalty to the Christian faith was greater than his duty as a soldier. In a moment of crisis before a battle, he declared to the emperor that he could no longer fight, as he was a soldier of Christ. In response, he was accused of cowardice and arrested, but his steadfastness never wavered. Shortly afterwards, upon being released, Martin left the army and began to dedicate his life to the service of God. He traveled to Poitiers, where he met Saint Hilary, bishop of that city and a tireless defender of Christian orthodoxy. Hilary recognized Martin as an enlightened spirit and encouraged him to follow the path of monastic life, which was beginning to develop in the West. Inspired by the example of the first desert monks and the search for holiness, Martin founded a monastery in Ligugé, the first in the West, where prayer, work, and charity shaped the daily lives of those who lived there. This monastery became a center of evangelization, attracting men who sought a path of devotion and learning under the guidance of one who was already recognized for his holiness. During his missionary journeys, Martin faced challenges in regions where paganism was still deeply rooted. His approach was different. Rather than violently confronting others' beliefs, he preferred peaceful persuasion and demonstrating the love of Christ. On one occasion, when trying to convert a village where there was a tree consecrated to a pagan god, he offered to stand under the tree while it was cut down, demonstrating his unshakable faith. Reports say that when the tree fell, a miracle happened. It changed direction at the last moment, sparing Martinho's life. This sign was seen by residents as a testimony to the true faith and led many to conversion. From that moment on, Martinho's name echoed as a symbol of courage and faith. Martin's evangelization work took him to many regions of Gaul, where he exorcised demons, healed the sick, and baptized converts. His life was marked by profound asceticism, but also by a constant smile and a humility that touched the hearts of the most skeptical. He did not seek glory for himself, but above all, he wanted souls to turn to Christ. In 371, faced with his growing reputation and influence, the clergy and people of Tours clamored for him to become their bishop. Initially, Martin resisted, preferring the simplicity of monastic life, but God's providence became clear. The call was to guide the city's flock, With great reluctance and humility, Martin accepted the position of Bishop of Tours. Even as a bishop, he maintained his austere lifestyle. He did not occupy palaces, but preferred to reside in a simple cell near his monastery in Marmoutier, which he founded to continue his work of evangelization and training of monks. The monastery soon became a spiritual reference point for Europe, sending missionaries and solidifying the Christian faith in the surrounding regions. One of the most notable marks of St. Martin's episcopate was his fight against Arianism, a heresy that denied the divinity of Christ. He was not afraid to confront authorities and bishops who deviated from orthodoxy, and his zeal for the truth put him in many risky situations. However, his meekness and prayer always prevailed over conflict. Martinho had an extraordinary capacity for spiritual discernment. Many who came to him were touched by the depth of his faith and the way his counsel reflected the wisdom of the gospel. It was common for miracles to occur after his prayers, confirming his reputation as a man deeply close to God. In a heartbreaking story, a desperate mother brought her dead son to Martinho, begging for a miracle. Moved by compassion and faith, he prayed fervently, and the boy came back to life. This miracle, among many others, made his fame spread throughout Christendom, leading multitudes to seek his intercession and teachings. Despite his importance as a bishop, Martin never turned away from the humble. He often visited the sick, consoled the poor, and interceded for those marginalized in society. His life was a continuous testimony of the gospel lived in practice, reflecting Jesus' words about love for others and compassion. Among his many virtues, his profound humility stood out. Even with the reverence he received from all sides, Martinho remained aware that everything he did was the work of God, not his own hands. He often exhorted his disciples not to seek worldly honors, but rather to dedicate their lives to the service of Christ. On one occasion, Martin had a vision in which the devil appeared to him in luxurious clothing, pretending to be Christ. Wisely, Martin discerned the falsehood and rebuked the impostor, saying, "My Lord does not come clothed in earthly glory, but in humility." This episode reinforced his reputation for being an attentive and vigilant man in spiritual things. Another notable aspect of his mission was his ability to unite peoples. At a time when religious and ethnic conflicts divided the empire, Martin was a peacemaker. He often intervened in disputes, seeking reconciliation and showing that true Christian faith is a source of unity rather than division. Throughout his life, Martin faced many trials, but his faith was a firm rock. Even in the face of persecution and misunderstanding, Martinho never backed down from his commitment to the truth. He was tireless in his pastoral zeal, visiting the most remote areas of his diocese, braving harsh climates and difficult terrain to bring the word of God. In every village and town, his name was whispered in awe, and news of his miracles and healings spread quickly. An impactful story tells how Martinho faced a local tyrant who oppressed the poor and exploited the peasants. Without fear, the bishop confronted the unjust leader and demanded that he stop his inhumane practices. Despite the threats, Martinho remained firm, and his courage led the tyrant to reconsider his actions, restoring justice to the region. Martinho's life was marked by profound asceticism. He fasted frequently and slept on a simple mat, even when he was already a consecrated bishop. His prayer practice was intense, and he spent nights in vigil, interceding for souls and seeking the presence of God. Those who knew him witnessed his aura of holiness and the peace that emanated from him. One of the most striking aspects of his mission was the destruction of pagan temples and the conversion of their adherents. However, Martinho always acted with a spirit of charity. Instead of inciting violence, he used dialogue and showed the uselessness of idols. Once, while destroying an idol, the locals tried to stone him, but his calm and firmness led them to rethink their beliefs. St. Martin's fame spread throughout the Roman Empire, and people came from far and wide to hear him and seek his prayers. His sermons were full of simplicity and depth, and he spoke with a conviction that touched even the most hardened hearts. They were not just words, but an expression of his entire life dedicated to the love of Christ and his neighbor. On a visit to a nearby town, Martinho cured a woman who had suffered from paralysis for years. The miracle was so impactful that many who witnessed the healing decided to convert to Christianity. These events were common in his life, but Martinho never took credit for them. He always attributed everything to the grace of God, reinforcing the faith of the newly converted. As the years passed, his influence in the church increased. He participated in important councils and was frequently consulted by other bishops on theological and pastoral matters. His firm stance against heresies and his devotion to the church's doctrine helped to consolidate the Catholic faith in times of great uncertainty and challenges. Although he was a figure of authority, Martinho never lost his sensitivity for the poorest. Once, while walking along a road, he came across a leper begging for alms. Without hesitation, Martinho stopped, hugged the man, and prayed for him. That gesture of love not only cured the leper's physical illness, but brought new hope to everyone who witnessed the scene. The last years of his life were marked by serene wisdom. Despite the health difficulties that began to appear with age, Martinho continued to work tirelessly for the good of his diocese and the spread of Christianity. He knew his time on earth was coming to an end, but that didn't scare him. Rather, he spoke of death as the transition to eternal life alongside the Lord. The news of his imminent departure began to spread, and people from all over came to see him one last time. Many cried, fearing losing their beloved pastor, but Martin consoled them, saying that he would always be interceding for them with God. He taught that the death of a Christian was not a tragedy, but a new beginning. On his deathbed, Martin was tempted one last time by the devil, who tried to frighten him with terrible visions. With the same firmness as throughout his life, he declared, "I fear not, for I belong to Christ." This was his last spiritual battle, one with the serenity that only a life of holiness could give. Martin departed this life in peace, surrounded by his disciples and clergy, who prayed and sang hymns. His countenance, even after his death, retained an expression of serenity as a visible sign that he had attained eternal rest. The entire Diocese of Tours and beyond mourned his departure, but also celebrated his glorious entry into heaven. After his death, miracles began to happen at his tomb. The sick were healed, and people witnessed heavenly lights that appeared at night. The place where Martin was buried became one of the most visited in medieval Europe, a pilgrimage center that attracted crowds seeking miracles and spiritual inspiration. Devotion to St. Martin of Tours spread quickly. He was recognized as a saint, not only by the people, but also by the Church, which saw in his life a clear example of holiness and absolute dedication to Christ. His feast day is celebrated on November 11th, a date that to this day reminds Christians of the power of charity and faith. Reports of his posthumous miracles continued to grow. People who visited his tomb brought reports of inexplicable healings, conversions, and signs of hope. Even the kings of France devoted themselves to St. Martin, seeking his intercession in moments of crisis and war. St. Martin's example inspired generations of Christians to live more fervently, to serve those in need, and to seek peace rather than conflict. He became the patron saint of soldiers due to his military origins and his act of compassion in sharing the mantle, reminding everyone that true victory comes from loving others. Martin is a reminder that holiness is not reserved just for those who live in monasteries or episcopal palaces. It can be found in the simplicity of charity, in the courage to defend the truth, and in the humility of recognizing that everything comes from God. Every act of his life was an expression of this deep understanding of the Christian faith. In every church dedicated to St. Martin, in every stained glass window that portrays his life, and in every believer who asks for his intercession, the message of his life continues to live. He taught that a heart dedicated to God can transform an entire society, a lesson that still resonates in the hearts of believers around the world. Thus, Saint Martin of Tours remains a perennial symbol of hope and courage. His life, from his youth in Siberia to his episcopate in Tours, was proof that true strength lies in humility and faith. His legacy is not limited to his time. He continues to inspire new missionaries, priests and lay people to follow the example of unconditional love and devotion to God. May the testimony of Saint Martin always remind us that, in every gesture of love and service, Christ is present. As he himself saw in his dream in Amiens, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these mine, you did for me." And so, his life echoes for eternity as a song of faith and surrender to God. The memory of Saint Martin of Tours is kept alive not only by his stories, but also by his unwavering devotion that inspires the hearts of Christians in all generations. He is, to this day, an example that holiness is within the reach of everyone who embraces faith with sincerity and humility. In his actions, faith was manifested in a practical and loving way, making him a true example of a disciple of Christ. Martin always emphasized that the Christian life should be a constant testimony of love and charity. He saw service to the poorest and most vulnerable as a direct extension of Christ's mission. For this reason, he is remembered as one of the saints closest to the people, someone who understood the difficulties of those who suffered and responded to them with compassion and tangible help. As the centuries passed, Saint Martin's influence spread throughout Europe. His figure became a symbol of kindness and protection, and his name was adopted by countless cities, towns, and parishes. Churches and cathedrals were erected in his honor, each carrying the promise of intercession and the memory of his exemplary life. Among the saints, Martin was known for his unshakable humility. He never sought personal power or glory. On the contrary, he avoided any type of ostentation. Even as a bishop, he wore simple clothes and walked among the poor as an equal. His presence was a mixture of spiritual authority and brotherhood, something that deeply touched everyone around him. A story told by his disciples demonstrates this spirit well. One day, a nobleman came to offer Martin a valuable gift in recognition of his miracles and teachings. The saint, instead of accepting it for himself, asked that the gift be distributed among those in need. This unwavering generosity was a constant in his life. Martinho knew that true leadership was not in dominating but in serving. He taught that a bishop or priest must be the first to sacrifice himself for the good of his flock. It was common to see him washing the feet of the poor, feeding the hungry, and visiting the homes of the sick. This behavior impressed both Christians and pagans, who saw in their actions the reflection of an authentic faith. The iconography of St. Martin often depicts him sharing his cloak with the beggar, a symbol not only of his compassion, but also of his deep understanding of the gospel. He believed that everything he owned was a gift from God and should be used for the benefit of others. This transformative vision shaped not only his life, but also the way the church related to the poor and marginalized. The stories about his exorcisms are also a testimony to his powerful faith. On several occasions, Martinho faced evil forces that terrorized entire communities. In one of these events, when exorcising a possessed man, his prayer and the sign of the cross were enough to free the unfortunate man, and the villagers, who previously feared the darkness, were led to the light of the Christian faith. One of the most profound lessons we can learn from the life of Saint Martin is his ability to forgive and understand. There were times when his opponents attacked and slandered him, but he never reciprocated with hatred. On the contrary, he prayed for those who persecuted him, following the example of Christ on the cross. This behavior was a strong testimony that love and forgiveness overcome any adversity. Martin was also known for encouraging his disciples to study the scriptures and live a life of constant prayer. He believed that knowledge of the Word of God was essential for defending the faith and forming strong Christians. His monastery at Marmoutier became a place of learning and spiritual formation, where prayer and work were intertwined. In his episcopate, Martin promoted a sense of community among the faithful. He organized prayer meetings and meetings where lay people could learn and share faith experiences. This helped to create an environment in which everyone felt part of the body of Christ, regardless of their social position. He was a shepherd who united and strengthened his flock. Over the centuries, devotion to Saint Martin has remained strong. Records of his virtues and miracles were passed down from generation to generation, and he became a much-loved saint. Kings, soldiers, monks, and common people invoked him, certain that he would respond with the same charity he demonstrated in life. St. Martin's example is particularly relevant in times of adversity, when faith and hope can waver. He showed that, even in the midst of challenges, it is possible to remain faithful to Christ and act with love. His life is a reminder that true victory comes from faithfulness to the divine calling and caring for others. In many places, the tradition of St. Martin's Day is celebrated with lantern parades and reenactments of the sharing of the mantle. Children and adults participate in these celebrations, learning about the importance of generosity and service to others. These customs help to perpetuate Martin's legacy and teach new generations about the transformative power of Christian charity. St. Martin was not only an example of a leader and pastor, but also a visionary. He believed that faith could transform societies and that true justice began with small acts of kindness. This vision continues to inspire the Church in its mission to evangelize and serve. Martinho's life was, without a doubt, a reflection of St. Paul's words, "I fought the good fight, I finished the race, I kept the faith." Even in moments of uncertainty and trial, he never doubted God's love or the power of divine mercy. His last moments on earth were witnesses to his total surrender. Even though he knew his end was approaching, he did not wish to stop serving. "Lord, if I am still needed by your people, I will not refuse work. Thy will be done," were his last words, filled with love and submission to the divine will. St. Martin's passage into eternity was an event surrounded by signs of peace and light. Reports say that a heavenly light enveloped the room where he died, and his disciples, although saddened by the loss, felt the comforting presence of God. Martinho had completed his mission on earth, but his spirit remained alive in every heart touched by his holiness. From the moment of his death, Martin's tomb became a place of fervent pilgrimage. Even those who were unable to meet him in life felt his presence and the grace of his prayers. Over the years, St. Martin's tomb in Tours became one of the most sacred and visited sites in medieval Europe. Kings and peasants, rich and poor, all went to that place in search of healing, consolation, and hope. The site has become a symbol of the Catholic faith, a reminder that God works through his saints to bring comfort and miracles to the world. The cult of Saint Martin expanded rapidly. His figure was venerated not only in France, but throughout Christendom. Churches and chapels were dedicated to him in different parts of the continent, and his name was immortalized in hymns, stories, and works of art. Paintings and stained glass windows that depicted Martin sharing his cloak with the beggar became iconic, reinforcing the message of charity and compassion. One of the most fascinating aspects of St. Martin's legacy is how he inspired not only religious life, but also social and cultural life. Many popular rituals and traditions around his festival emerged, such as the custom of children carrying lanterns in night processions, symbolizing the light of faith that Martin brought to the world. These practices helped unite communities around values of solidarity and faith. The Feast of St. Martin on November 11th became an occasion of great importance in medieval Europe, marking the end of the harvest and the beginning of spiritual preparation for Advent. The date was celebrated with banquets and acts of charity, and people remembered Martinho's generous gesture in sharing his mantle, renewing his commitment to helping those in need. In the Middle Ages, many kings and rulers sought St. Martin's protection before entering battles or making difficult decisions. He was considered a protective saint, especially of soldiers, due to his military origins, and because he demonstrated that true strength lies in faith and compassion. Devotion to him brought courage and inspired acts of bravery tempered by justice and mercy. The relevance of St. Martin surpassed geographical and temporal barriers, reaching today as an example of Christian virtues. Parishes around the world continue to celebrate his memory by organizing events that remember his life and highlight the importance of living according to the precepts of Christ. Martinho's story remains alive, passed down from generation to generation as a testimony to the beauty of holiness. Martin's example is especially important for those who face dilemmas about their faith or vocation. He shows that even people in positions of power or in difficult contexts can choose to live righteously and godly lives. His story is an encouragement for believers to trust in God and face challenges with love and faith. The spirituality of St. Martin is a lighthouse that guides both religious and lay people on their Christian journey. His love for the poor, his life of prayer, his pastoral zeal, and his courage in facing adversity show that holiness is a possible goal for all who dedicate themselves to the gospel. He is a clear example of how a life of simplicity and service can leave a lasting impact. His message of compassion and charity is more relevant than ever in today's world, where selfishness and indifference often prevail. Martin invites us to look beyond ourselves and recognize Christ in each person, especially those most in need. He reminds us that every act of kindness counts and that true wealth lies in sharing what we have with others. The story of St. Martin of Tours, marked by his courage, humility, and unconditional love, continues to inspire lives. His dedication to the common good and his willingness to sacrifice himself for others are proof that true leadership is in service. He is a role model who challenges all of us to follow in his footsteps and practice charity in our daily lives. May St. Martin of Tours intercede for us so that we can learn to love as he loved, serve as he served, and live a life that, in the end, testifies to the goodness of God. May your life be a constant invitation to holiness and a reminder that as we share our mantle with others, we bring the light of Christ to the world.